it's time for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, do you believe that Labour will crack down on trade unions? Now, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting declared that Labour would take on hostile health unions in a bid to save the NHS as it requires drastic reform. Streeting singled out the British Medical Association, or the BMA, for its apparent hostility towards the idea that patients should expect better standards. Now, figures show that the NHS hit a record 7.2 million people on the waiting list, which is set to worsen. Around about 15,000 operations were expected to be cancelled next week due to the nurses' strike over demands for a pay rise of 19%, which is somewhat unrealistic. Now, Labour's approach towards unions suggests that Sir Keir Starmer's party is adopting a new approach, indicating a separation from the party and its traditional roots. Now, this is despite the fact that the Labour Party accept more than £15 million from unions since Sir Keir Starmer's been the leader. So for the Great British Debate, I'm asking, do you actually believe that the Labour Party will crack down on these trade unions? I'm joined now by former Sun Editor Kelvin MacKenzie. Kelvin, thank you so much and welcome to the programme. Kelvin, firstly, do you actually believe that they are telling the truth, or do you think it's just a land grab and a trick to tell us that they really are going to do what we want them to do?
Well, I think you have to define what is a health union. He's attacking the BMA effectively for saying, voting the other day, that between 9 and 5 they were going to work and they weren't going to work any other times, which is a catastrophe for anybody who's ever tried actually to try and get a GP under any circumstances. So that's a particularly narrow attack. I'd be actually more impressed with him if he'd attacked either Unison or the GMB, people who represent ambulance drivers who are prepared to let your mother lie on a bathroom floor gasping for breath in return for pay, or Unison or any of the majors. So he's been very narrow, and he would get support, I suspect. And this is where the Conservative Party are actually slightly at risk, because the truth about the matter is, I don't hear anybody at the top end of the Conservative Party who run our country actually saying things which will appeal to basic Conservative voters. They should say to the doctors, you're either going to start working 7 days a week, you're either going to start working 12 hours a day, or please don't become members of the NHS. And I think that is where both sides of the argument are going to end up. We are going to end up with doctors not working for the NHS because they can do better in private. And actually, if I could access and not pay taxes, but could use my cash to get to my doctor when I wanted to, I would personally prefer that. And the people who don't want this are people who don't pay taxes. Well, that's fine. They can stay with the NHS. So that's where this argument's going. Wes Streeting is just being cunning. He is just simply making his argument very narrowly towards the doctors and the GPs. We need a wider debate on, is there any future for the NHS? Because right now, if the nurses and the ambulance drivers are prepared to sentence your mum and dad to death in return for a pay rise, what is the point of an NHS which was set up, 75, 77 years ago, and the moment may have passed? Everything appears to be free, but actually it's all being paid out of taxes, and only 50% of the country pays tax. So 50% are having a free NHS service. And what do you get for nothing? You get the NHS service we've got today, which is not working for 100% of the people, let alone the 50% who are paying for it.
It's interesting you say that as well. And I'm sure a large portion of that 50% probably also have private medical cover. I want to bring in author and journalist Rebecca Reid, and also, who else have I got? National Secretary Lorcan Whitehead. Let's bring them both in. Rebecca, I want to start with you then. What did you think of what Kelvin's saying? Because he's pointed out that pretty much, 50% of the people are paying for this thing. A large portion aren't paying for it, and doesn't appear to be fit for purpose at the moment.
Well, I'm only just talking to Kelvin because of his comments about the football commentary, but suspending that temporarily, even though I do think you are bang out of order, Kelvin. I understand, and actually a friend of mine from my NCT group couldn't get an ambulance for her daughter over the weekend, and I understand that in that scenario, it's one of the most frightening, awful things that can happen to you. And we do take for granted that somebody will come to your door quickly if you need them. But it's difficult because, we talk about nurses and doctors as heroes and angels, but at the end of the day, it's a career choice. It's their job. It's what they get paid for. And anybody individually has a right to want to be paid more, paid fairly, paid enough to be able to have a decent standard of life. And it's a highly skilled job. So I don't think it's unreasonable. Surprising they want more money. I fear that the time may be coming that, yes, we do have to assess how a National Health Service functions and whether, in my opinion, people who earn more need to pay more into it. And I think it's incumbent on you, if you can afford private health insurance, to get it, but to keep paying the same tax as well, in the same way that people who send their children to private schools continue to pay taxes that go towards education, but they don't personally partake of that system.
And do you think that the Labour Party are being genuine? Because Wes Streeting is saying that he's going to clamp down on more hostile trade unions. Do you trust that they meaning that, or do you think they're trying to sort of land grab a lot of the Conservative votes?
I think it's difficult to ever believe what any politician says. And over the course of my life, I don't remember anybody making a promise and then doing it. Literally, I can barely remember that happening ever. But I am a believer in Keir Starmer in the sense that I much prefer him to Jeremy Corbyn. I think he's sensible. He's clearly very intelligent, whatever else you think. So I think we don't really have a choice but to trust him. I think Labour have always got the same very difficult problem, which is that they're a party of two very different groups of people. Left-wing Islington types like me, and then also left-wing, usually outside of London, traditionally working-class people. And those two groups want slightly different things, and they want different language. I want everyone to be cuddled and stroked and told that everything's going to be okay. My friends and family in the north who have working-class backgrounds want harder line, more direct conversation. So I think it's a very difficult line for him to walk, and I don't envy Keir Starmer trying to appease both those groups of people and the unions who have a lot of power and a lot of money. That's why David Miliband didn't get to be leader of the Labour Party previously, because the unions didn't like him.
Lorcan, what's your view on that? What do you think? Do you think the Labour Party are being genuine?
Well, I think that I think that Wes Streeting's comments are particularly misguided. I think we've got people suffering all across this country. And, workers in our NHS, nurses, we've got posties, we've got teachers, we've got all sorts of people wanting to take action to, get better pay, defend their pay in a Tory cost of living crisis. And I don't think that Wes Streeting should be, going into the press and attacking working people for wanting to do that. I think he should be supporting them in doing that.
So you're kind of in support of him. Are you in support of him? Then you're not in support of him with his stance on these trade unions then? No, I wouldn't be supportive.
I think he's, some of the comments in the press today from Wes Streeting have been about, the need to take a hard line, and he's not afraid to stand up against vested interests. But, we're talking about people on the front line of our public services, delivering essential services, which we all rely on, who are being hit really hard, like everybody in this country at the moment, by this cost of living crisis, like many of your viewers will be, I'm sure. And so, I don't think it's the right line to be saying that he's going to take a tough line and crack down on them and their vested interests. I think they're ordinary people who are standing up for a decent day's pay. And the Labour Party, which was, let's not forget, founded to represent the interests of working people in Parliament, should be doing what it was founded to do, and standing by those people and supporting them and helping them to get the defend their pay and get the gains that they need.
Kelvin.
Well, particularly, I found that reaction a bit strange, because actually the BMA, our GPs who are working so hard, have just said that they want to. They voted to reduce their working hours to between 9 and 5. Well, people, and that'll be 5 days a week. Well, people go to work. There are working people who need to be treated, and they can't guarantee that they're going to be all between 9 and 5. So I find that a difficult argument. I also find it impossible to say that when you join the NHS, or you're a nurse or an ambulance driver, that you can genuinely say, and by the way, a junior doctor, because they'll be the next lot coming down the pipe, that you can genuinely say, I tell you what I'm going to do, I am going to walk off the job and you lot can just go and die. I find that impossible to justify whether I'm right, left or centre. I have yet to hear an argument and this is the first time I've ever heard an argument where you say, well, working people are entitled to do whatever they like. I do not believe they're entitled to, in the same way as the army can't walk off the job and the police can't walk off the job. Nobody in the NHS can be allowed to simply walk off the job. And what I dislike intensely about the Conservative Party is not that they're not that they don't have some good ideas. They're not tough enough on saying this, and just simply say, if Unison, GMB, anybody who does that, we will seize your assets. You are not to kill innocent people. It doesn't seem a big thing to ask, to simply say when you sign
very
your
briefly,
contract, I will not kill innocent people. What's wrong with that?
Can I get Rebecca to comment quickly then?
Because I want to understand what the logical extension of that is. If you said that we are no longer going to pay doctors and nurses, would you accept that it would then be fair for them to say, well, fine, we won't work?
Well, the issue is they don't have to do it. They don't have to work in the NHS. They don't have to work anywhere. But I am saying if you sign a contract, you have to undertake you will not kill people. What is your argument to the nurses and the doctors? What about the ambulance drivers? The ambulance driver doesn't turn up to your mother. Your mother dies from a stroke that she wouldn't have died. How would you feel about that argument?
Well, listen, I'll get the final comment to you, Lorcan. Can I get Lorcan to comment? Final comment to you, Lorcan.
I think Kelvin's, he's living in cloud cuckoo land, to be honest. The reason that we've got people taking action in our NHS and, particularly, our nurses and other workers in our NHS is because of the falling standards after over a decade of underfunding from this Tory government, which has driven down standards. This is the reason why we've got people waiting like we've been hearing for so long for ambulances. This is driving down safety standards. I know people who work in the NHS, and I know people who organise people who work in the NHS, and it has been very, very hard to get them to vote for strike action because they have such a duty to their patients, and they feel that duty. But the reason a lot of them have decided to do it is because safety standards have been driven down so far, and so they know that they need to take some action and stop the rot which is going on in our NHS at the moment.
Well, listen, I'm going to have to leave it there, but I'm going to say thank you very much for your contributions. Former Sun Editor Kelvin MacKenzie, National Security Secretary, Momentum, Lorcan, Whitehead, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Thank you so much.